Welcome back to Capitol Time. I'm Tim Boyum. In the first few months of the second Trump administration, there's been a lot of focus on undocumented people in the U.S. The White House has made immigration enforcement a central part of their agenda, leading to several high-profile apprehensions of even some who are in the U.S. legally. Here in North Carolina, one advocate, a pastor, has been on the forefront of immigration protections for years. North Carolina journalist Billy Ball recently did a deep dive of the pastor for his project, The Living South, and he joins me in studio. Bill, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Talk about The Living South for a minute first. This is a neat concept.
Yeah, so The Living South kind of came out of a lot of the work that I was already doing. I've been a journalist in North Carolina and, more broadly speaking, the South forever, to be more approximate, about 20 years or so. and kind of along the way, I think my favorite part of the job was getting to meet new, interesting people. And we have no shortage of that in the South. And I think that we have amazing storylines, amazing, troubled, deep, dark, interesting history that as a storyteller, you know, it's just something that you want to go deeper and deeper into. So with The Living South, I found that I wanted to spend more time on those stories, sort of stretch out, go deeper and wider, and specifically talk to those people who I think are the most interesting people in the South. Of course, that's my subjective opinion that they're the most interesting. They're interesting to me, and I hope that the readers find them that way as well. And I think Isaac Villegas was a great example of that, because here I find out about a pastor who has been using his church as a sanctuary for folks who the federal government has been wanting to deport. You know, the churches have a long, long history of doing stuff like that, not just in America. You go back in the history books, you'll find stuff like this. But I thought Isaac was a perfect example. I was like, here's a Southerner who's just doing fascinating things, and I think will spark conversation about who we are and where we're from.
Yeah, and by the way, the fascination of these stories in his past were the intersection of it's the fastest changing culturally part of the U.S., the fastest growing in general, but that intersection is just so fascinating to me. So tell me more about this. So he just started doing this, or he felt it was the need of the church to do it?
You know, Isaac, and the time that I was talking to him, and also from reading his book, Migrant God, which was a fascinating read. It was more like a work of journalism than it was the work of a preacher, although there was plenty of stuff in there about Christian theory. But, you know, Isaac came to this as a person who felt very strongly about what he was seeing with undocumented immigration, and this long precedes President Trump. I mean, immigration in the United States is a long, long story. Of course, we are a country of immigrants.
And a bipartisan story.
Yeah, bipartisan story. You know, a lot of the conversation that I have in this story with Isaac Villegas is about some of the really brutal shifts in immigration policy that happened under President Clinton way back in 1995, but to this day, we have a situation in which the border agents are patrolling cities along the border, but leaving these huge stretches of desert that basically funnel undocumented folks to this desert, and we know thousands have died on this trek, and we know border agents have gone to the desert to destroy water for these people. So it's a hard thing to try to digest, but you're absolutely right. It's a bipartisan thing, and there hasn't been much gap between Democrats and Republicans on this for years. I think there's a big gap now in the aggressiveness with which President Trump has pursued this, and this was one of his campaign promises, to roll out the largest deportation program in American history. Whether he gets there or not, we don't know, but we know that they are trying very hard to aggressively pursue people, even in, as I mentioned in the story, churches and schools and outside of government offices, courthouses. We're hearing stories like that. I know you have, covering it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sit tight if you can. I got to take a break. I want to talk about that, about going after them in churches, because there's an interesting kind of concept around that too. Stay with us. Much more to come here on Capitol Tonight. Welcome back to Capitol Tonight. I'm Tim Boyum. Tonight we're talking with journalist Billy Ball about his recent deep dive on a North Carolina pastor who's an outspoken advocate for immigration rights. Billy, we got a few minutes left, but we were talking about this during the break. This intersection of sort of the Trump administration and churches. I don't think people have thought about, well, first of all, they may not know that they're sanctuaries often, or can be. But where does he sit with this whole issue in the administration about going to churches?
Back in January, after he took office, there was a flurry of activity from from President Trump's office, but one of the things that he said, and I'm sure this is something that he took from his last administration, where these churches were being used as sanctuaries, was that he was authorizing ICE to go into places like churches, schools, courthouses. That, you know, they're saying that and then there's doing that, of course. And I think even the Trump administration, which is very aggressive on immigration, probably doesn't love the image of ICE agents breaking down church doors and dragging people out. That said, this merger here, we have, if you look back in the history books, and I try not to go too deep into history, but on this issue, there's a long history of people who say, I'm not going to break into a church and take people out for their political beliefs. This is a place where we separate our agents, our soldiers, our whatever, from breaking down doors. And so I think even now that barrier is hard to break. And that's why you see pastors who, like Isaac Villegas, who very much believe that it is Christian and right for them to protect people who might be separated from their families or being taken back to violent situations, like the person Rosa, who he sheltered, who was going back to a place with a violent partner. You know, they see it as part of their religious calling, and as Isaac told me, there is man's law and then there's God's law. And to him, God's law trumps man's law.
We've got about 30 seconds left, but is he afraid that they will come into his church and that he could be arrested for harboring?
You know, he's been arrested before. So, you know, we talked in the story about that. I mean, he's a true believer. So I think of all of his fears, I don't think that was up there. I think his greatest fear was the way that that aggressive immigration actions break up communities and the terror that it can inflict on people who have American citizens who are children now. And those people being afraid to take their kids to school or to go to a hospital, that's, I think, I got the sense was more frightening to him.
The side that people probably don't think about. Fascinating story. Again, just real quick, where can people check this out?
TheLivingSouth.com, totally free to sign up. I hope for it to be really interesting storytelling about the South.
All right, Billy, good to see you as always, my friend.
Good to see you.
All right, that's going to do it for tonight, folks. As always, if it's on Jones Street or Main Street, you'll find it here in Capitol tonight. Stay safe, look after each other. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.